Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Pagey, here once again with another video. So we are heading to the final line. Maybe the Flash line, I know it probably goes either way. Anyway, the finish line of the DCEU or the DC Extended Universe with Aquaman 2 or Aquaman in the Lost Kingdom at the end of this year. Though it could be moved to next year because of the strikes going on, but there's really been no proper news on that as of yet in regards to at least confirmation, it's staying or it's going. It's still up in the air, but I think they're saying it's probably going to come out at the end of the year and it's not going to move. But the DCEU, of course, has had its ups and its downs throughout it, whether that was in the actual movies themselves or just various circumstances outside of what we saw on screen. But we do have James Gunn's DC Universe, or DCU, not DCEU, but DCU, on its way over the next couple of years, with some projects already underway, like Creature Commandos, which at the moment is set to come out sometime next year, maybe first half, around the halfway point, something like that. But one of the final movies in the DCEU, the third final one really, if you think about it, was of course The Flash, which is said to be what the reboot comes from, though the movie doesn't really straight up explain that or set that up in regards to other characters. I think it's just something we go with the flow with and just see what happens afterwards. But recently, Jay Oliver, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Oliver? I don't know, I'm probably butchering the name, my bad. But he was a storyboard artist on a plethora of DCEU films, as well as for the Flash TV show in its early days, and he talked to Inverse and revealed what the original plan was for the Flash as a character within the DCEU, involving a trilogy leading to a Flashpoint crossover film and a villain reveal that would have connected it to all of the entire DCEU. So Jay was the director of the Flashpoint Paradox animated films, which I'm sure most people have seen. So after that film's success, he was brought in to do storyboard work for the first few seasons of the Flash television show on the CW, involved in action scenes as well with that. And the success with this led to being involved with the Flash film and other DCEU projects. Now, Jay said he worked with the first director that was properly hired for the Flash film, that being Seth Grahame-Smith, but after Seth left, just due to creative differences, Jay stuck around and worked alongside the newly hired director at the time in Rick Famuyiwa, though Jay does say Rick's idea for the film isn't anything like what we got in the 2023 version of the Flash film a few months back. Rick's movie wasn't the Flashpoint movie. Originally, there was supposed to be just Zack Snyder's 5 films and one side movie, which ended up being Suicide Squad. But after the success of Man of Steel, Warner Brothers decided to go all in on its cinematic universe. Rick's movie was going to be a series of films, just like Aquaman. I think of all those films, they were planning to be trilogies. And the Flash films weren't going to be their own little, thing that might involve some other characters popping here and there throughout the different movies, and not be that important to the larger picture. No, they were going to be very important, as they would have actually involved a plan to introduce a certain man in yellow who would have connected to other things, that of course being Eobard Thawne, aka Professor Zoom, aka Reverse Flash. Rick's movie was laying the groundwork for Zoom as the big baddie of the DC universe. It was Professor Zoom pulling the strings because he had come from the future to basically F with Barry. In the Flash movie, Zoom would be the villain in the background, but also in the ancillary other films, you would see some of the influences of Zoom on the rest of the Justice League. And you might be wondering, what would have been the build-up from this Flash trilogy of films and these other influences in other films within the universe with Professor Zoom, aka Reverse Flash? Well, it actually would have revolved around a full circle moment for Jay back to Flashpoint. At the ending of Zack's Darkseid quadrilogy, what a word, or whatever, we would end up with a Justice League Unlimited version of the Snyderverse, and Justice League Unlimited is like the TV show, the animated one. And then you flip it, you do Flashpoint Paradox. Everybody who's friends are now enemies, and it's a world that you don't want to live in. You can reboot the universe and introduce a new cast that way afterwards, because after 10 years, the actors need to go on to something else anyway. And that would have been one hell of a full circle moment for Jay at the very least. Not necessarily in control of it all the way through, but just to be involved in it, going from the animated version of the Flashpoint storyline from the comics into that movie, then over to the Flash TV show in its early inception, then to the earlier stages of the film's universe, to then capping it, how many years later it would have been, with a live action version of that animated movie that you started off at all the way at the beginning. I mean, it would have been pretty poetic, but also sort of unbelievable at the same time that could happen. Now, Jay did finish off by saying this about his Flashpoint animated movie, and the lost potential of not seeing that carry through to live action. I wanted to really capture the grimness of the comic, but also lay the groundwork for adapting this as if this was a Marvel live action film. I just thought that would have been fantastic. Can you imagine Jason Momoa fighting Gal Gadot and then having that love story? All of the missed opportunities, being a part of it was so exciting, and then having to shift gears and pivot, it's kind of sad. I would have loved to have seen it get to this point. Now, in regards to this and just sort of what it could have been, and, you know, even just whether it would have worked out, the plan sounds very interesting. It makes you wonder what could have been and what other movies could have been slotted in there to play a part, obviously, because they talk about how, or Jay talks about how originally it was just going to be like Zack Snyder's 5 movies, which I think would have been Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and then I think a 3-part Justice League. I think that's what the 5 movies would have been. I might be wrong, let me know if I am. But, you know, outside of that, what other movies would have been there, and then how the Flash movie might have interconnected, might I say, with some other films and all that stuff. It would have been very interesting to see play out. Those plans aren't necessarily listed here. It's more just a general plan of mainly what the Flash stuff would have been, and then just see how all the other universe, you know, bits and pieces, or, you know, bits of the puzzle, you know, sort of connected stuff. And whether it works out at the end is another, you know, another discussion in itself, because, you know, everyone can have a plan, but it's whether it all works out together. All the directors have to be in sync. You have to actually have someone that's properly involved with it. And that's sort of something that's sort of been highlighted before, is that like Snyder had this plan, but was it a plan overall? So that's like, you know, probably the issue that came at hand in the end of it. It was like, who's the one actually orchestrating it together? You know, some stories were started before other people were involved. It would have gotten confusing if there wasn't that central person involved at the beginning. Now, would I have personally wanted to see this? I mean, I would have loved to have seen the Flashpoint Paradox, that like animated movie, and just the story from the comics, like, you know, translated into live action. Though I also am an advocate of, like, you know, adding your own individual flair to it. Don't just translate what's on the page to screen, because you can just go read the comic. So I don't mind if it's like a 50-50. So I wouldn't mind to see some like differences there, or expand. Like, that would have been the cool thing. Expand beyond what we see in the comic, as well as the animated movie as well. What else is out there in this Flashpoint movie? That would have been really cool. Whether it was with like a Suicide Squad, or maybe some other sort of like movie that might have come along the way, that they could, like a Teen Titans or something like that, or a Titans group, and then see what they would have been like in the Flashpoint universe, or at least focus on them much more. That would have been cool if you just expanded a bit more, because then it sort of, you know, goes past just translating it from page to screen. But of course, there were a lot of cracks that showed up within the DCEU that just sort of, I think, like, pretty early on, we sort of thought we weren't going to get anywhere close to this, at least like one connected story from Man of Steel all the way through to this. There was just too many cracks earlier on, and I think we all know that when like BVS wasn't that well received, that, you know, things just probably weren't going to go that well, like, unfortunately. But it'll be very interesting to see what James Gunn does with all this stuff, and see where he goes with it, because I don't think he's going to really be building up to anything Flashpoint related. But just in regards to like the interconnectivity with like villains and them lingering in the background, it'll be very interesting, because with Thawne, Professor Zoom, Reverse Flash, whichever way you want to call him, he is someone that you can definitely do that with in a different circumstance, just messing with Barry, might I say. You can easily do that. Now, in not the same, I think it's just the same overall interview, but it was sort of split up on the website, which is inverse. Jay was also talking about the solo Ben Affleck Batman movie, because he was involved with that back in the day when it was, you know, they were writing the script and everything like that. But Jay did say this about Ben Affleck's Batman movie, and, you know, in particular the script. He said Ben's story was going to cover something that had never really been covered in comics, but was building off of storylines in the Batman mythos over the last 80 years and approaching it from a new kind of perspective. I've worked on a lot of Batman things, and what was really cool about it was tying together a lot of really cool Batman storylines that had never really been explored. It was very clever, and there were a lot of things about it that I really loved that I wish that had come to fruition. It was a really great project in the beginning. Ben did have to step away for personal reasons, and I totally understood, but the time that I spent with Ben working on the project was fantastic. Now, of course, this was the script that was being co-written by Ben Affleck and Jeff Johns, so of course, in regards to the mythos stuff, that of course would have been coming, you'd have to think, from the Jeff Johns side, but Ben then adds that his own sort of like creative flair to it, because Ben Affleck's not just an actor, also writer-director as well, and, you know, a lot of people know him as a director nowadays as well, so it would have been very interesting to see this project in regards to what it could have been. But once again, some of the cracks that showed up from like BVS and Ford and stuff, sometimes you just can't repair those. So You know, I'm not saying BVS was the reason, but like, you know what I mean? Like it stems from that. So yeah, it's like one of those what if situations. I'm sure there's like an alternate timeline or like somewhere else in the multiverse where they got this movie or some version of it. But I'm very interested to see like what he meant by like how it touches upon all the different parts of the mythos, and it's something that we haven't seen before. And I guess this interview's done like post the Batman from last year, so I guess the Batman didn't touch upon it either. Like I think Deathstroke was meant to be the villain of this movie, or at least be involved with it. So it would have been very intriguing to see what it would have been, as well as being directed by Ben Affleck as well. Yeah, just one of those what if situations. And yeah, I guess it's a shame you never get to see it, just out of curiosity's sake. Whether it would have been good or not, we don't know. But I mean, it's Ben Affleck directing it. It probably would have been pretty decent. But yeah, guys, that's all to go over. We'll leave the links to the 2 interviews in the description down below if you want to read them in full. Because I didn't mention everything, because some of it's just nothing that I felt was like new enough to talk, but you might not know about it, so you might want to go read them. So they will be linked in the description down below. If you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome to drop a like on it to show support. Let me know in the comment section down below your various opinions on all the stuff we went over in this video. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.